Our scripture reading this morning is from Matthew 18, 23 through 31. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. At this time, the servant fell on his knees before him. "Be patient with me," he begged, "and I will pay back everything." The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. He grabbed him and he began to choke him. "Pay back what you owe me," he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, "Be patient with me, and I will pay it back." But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged and went and told their master everything that had happened. May the Lord bless the reading and hearing of his word.
So, American debt is on the rise. That's probably not any news to you guys. And I'm not just talking about national debt. I'm talking about American household debt. In the last 6 years, from 2019 to today, American household debt has quadrupled from $4.6 trillion in 2019 to $18.2 trillion today. Isn't that crazy? Now, most of that debt, 85% of it, is for mortgages, student loans, and car loans. So like those are the big three that make up most of our debt. But another 15%, $1.2 trillion, is credit card debt. And if you don't know, surely you know this already, credit card debt is bad debt. It's high interest debt. It's debt that keeps compounding and compounding without end. Even if you just pay the minimum amounts, it can still bury you so deep that you feel like you can't get out from underneath it, right? Credit card debt's the worst of all the different forms of debt we have. And so currently 4% of American households are delinquent on one form of debt or another. And I was thinking about that while I was thinking about the story that Rick just read for us. Because that servant was delinquent on a debt so huge, like it was literally impossible for people to imagine it. We talked a couple weeks ago about how much a talent was. That a talent wasn't a coin. A talent is a weight of gold or silver, and it's equivalent to 20 years of labor. That's one talent. And this guy owed 10,000 talents. I mean, it's beyond a life sentence of debt that he owed, right? And just to put this in perspective, Josephus, who's kind of an ancient historian, he estimated that King Herod received in yearly taxes from the whole region of Judea, he received somewhere around 600 to 800 talents per year. So this singular man owed it would take Herod 12 to 15 years to receive from all of Judea. It was an unimaginable sum for anyone who was listening to Jesus' story. And yet somehow, miraculously, the debt was forgiven. The slate is wiped clean. Can you imagine being in debt that deep and having your debt, boom, paid for, wiped off the books? Can you imagine, just being real, if this is true that all of us, household debt, I imagine all of us owe some version of debt, whether it's for our car, our home, our college, or whatever. Can you imagine just with a stroke of a pen being debt-free? Wouldn't that be amazing? And so I found myself thinking about this, and I was like, I'm going to preach a sermon about being debt-free, having the slate wiped clean. And the more and more I thought about it, I thought, that's not quite true. Because I don't think the servant in the story ended up debt-free. In fact, I think, yes, the king forgave his monetary debt, but he still owed other debts to the king. He owed a debt of, the three ones I can think of, he owed a debt of honor, a debt of gratitude, and a debt of mercy. And because he was delinquent on those debts, he ended up in prison. So let's talk about them, okay? First, a debt of honor. I used to be a children's pastor at this previous church I served at, and we used this curriculum that defined these virtues and terms. I always liked the definitions. And so they defined honor as simply letting someone know you see how valuable they are. Now, in the ancient world and in today's world, right, we tend to honor those who are above us, whether it's our parents, our teachers, our bosses, our leaders. We naturally pay honor to those who are over us because there's a penalty, a cost if we dishonor them. They can mess with our lives in ways we don't want, so we pay them honor. So in the ancient world and in our world today, honor flows up. But in the biblical model, this gets turned upside down so that honor flows down, because we believe Jesus Christ, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, the guy who's at the very top of the pyramid, what did he say about himself? He said, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. And he instructed his followers, as you do it to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, so you have done it to me. So we believe that honor flows downward, that as we show honor to the least of these, to those who can never, ever repay us, to those who have no power over us, yet in honoring them, we honor our King. So honor flows. My favorite illustration of this in the Bible actually comes from the Old Testament, not the New Testament. It's the story of Mephibosheth. Don't say that 5 times fast. It's always Mephibosheth. I can't even do it. Okay, I was going to try it. I can't do it. So if you aren't familiar with the story of David and Mephibosheth, Mephibosheth was the son of Jonathan, the grandson of Saul. And when David became king, when Saul and Jonathan were killed in battle, first he kind of consolidated power. He got, he was crowned king at a ceremony. He moved to, kind of consolidated the capital at Jerusalem. He did all these things. And then the next thing he asked was, did Jonathan have any children, any heirs? And I'm sure when David asked this question, his counselors and advisors thought, okay, he's going to clean house. He's going to eliminate the last possible threat to his kingship. Because Mephibosheth was a threat, not because of who he was. In fact, Mephibosheth in reality was crippled. He was lame in both feet, the Bible tells us. He wasn't a great warrior. He wasn't a man of great stature, but he was a threat. Why? Because he was the last remaining heir. Those who were loyal to Saul, those who were loyal to Jonathan, they might have rallied around him and, incited a rebellion, a challenge to David's kingship. And so because of this, Mephibosheth lived on the run. He lived in the far edges of the kingdom, and he counted on the kindness and protection of strangers. He was afraid of David and afraid of what was going to happen. But David summoned him into his presence. And you can imagine, when Mephibosheth came before David, he had no idea what was awaiting him. He was likely afraid of what was going to happen. And so he bowed down before David and he to pay him honor. For 2 Samuel 9:6, remember? Honor flows up. And Mephibosheth showed David honor. But then notice what happened next. David said to him, "Don't be afraid." And then he said, I'm going to restore everything to you. I'm going to give you back the land of your father and your grandfather. And you will always have a place at my table. David paid honor downward. Mephibosheth, he can't understand it. He's like, what? Why would you think? And this is how Mephibosheth thought of himself. He says, what is your servant? Who am I that you should notice a dead dog like me? I'm useless to you. And David knew that to be true, but he'd already told him why. For the sake of your father, Jonathan, and his friendship to me. You see, David remembered that he owed a debt. Jonathan had been his friend through thick and thin. Jonathan on multiple times had interceded, risked his own life to save David from the anger of his father Saul. David remembered the debt. And he paid it forward by honoring Jonathan's son. Now, in just a couple days, Ashley had kind of mentioned in her prayer, we're going to celebrate Veterans Day. And this is a day when we honor those who have served in our country, those who have honored us by their sacrifice. And I know on Veterans Day, it's one of those things it's real easy just to kind of pay lip service to. And I want to challenge us as a church, challenge you as a person. How can you show honor on Veterans Day? It might be doing exactly what David did, that you invite someone that you know who served our country to share a meal at your table. Or it might be if you're in a restaurant somewhere and you see or notice someone who's a veteran, just picking up the tab for their meal. We have a military ministry here in our church. And right now, it just so happens we're putting together care packages to send to service members around the holidays, especially those who aren't going to be home. We want them to know our prayer and our support. And guess what? Anyone who wants, if you want to write a note of thanks and gratitude, even if you don't know who the veteran is, just to say thank you for your service to our country, and we're praying for you and wishing you well. It means so much. Remember, honor, what is it? It's letting people know you see how valuable they are. And so with each one of these debts, I'm going to ask a question, and here's the question for you to think about. How can you show honor to someone who has sacrificed on your behalf? Who can you show honor to this week? Second debt I want you to think about is gratitude, which again, the same children's curriculum defined it as letting someone know you see that they've helped you. And again, I don't know if it's just because it was Veterans Day. I just found myself thinking of examples, and the one that popped to my mind was an example not from the Old Testament or the New Testament, but from modern film. One of my favorite movies, Saving Private Ryan. And I don't know how many of you have seen Saving Private Ryan. I'm hoping you're familiar with the story because there's going to be a few spoilers in here. But Captain Miller, played by Tom Hanks, he and his crew are sent deep into enemy territory in order to save and rescue Private James Ryan, played by Matt Damon. Because Private Ryan's brothers had all been killed in battle, he was the last remaining son of his family, and so they were sent to go find him, rescue him, bring him home. And because they were going deep into enemy territory, they ran into several armed conflicts, the final conflict of which is to save a small French town from advancing German forces. And in that conflict, Captain Miller, along with many other members of the unit, died. And one of the most poignant, kind of profound scenes of the movie is as Tom Hanks is breathing his last on the bridge, Private Ryan is there, and he whispers, he has some words to share with him, and he simply says to him, "Earn this." And then the movie ends with Private Ryan, many, many years later, standing before Captain Miller's grave at Arlington. And he's surrounded by his family, his children, his grandchildren, and they are with him. And he turns to his wife, and he says, "Tell me that I've lived a good life. Tell me that I'm a good man." There was a debt that he couldn't pay, that really he couldn't earn. The best he could do was to live a good life, a life that was eternally grateful for the sacrifice he'd received. There are some debts that you and we will never be able to repay. And the grace of God is one of those debts. The grace of God is given to us freely. It doesn't depend on how good a life we lived. It's not about our goodness. It's about God's goodness. It's given to each of us freely, and yet that grace cost God dearly, because it cost him the sacrifice of his only begotten Son. And that sacrifice is so great and large a debt, we can never repay it, never, ever. We are forever in God's debt, and this is by God's design, because what he wants is for that debt of gratitude to shape our lives in grace-filled ways. And so the second question I have for you is this: how can you show gratitude for a gift you have received by paying it forward to someone else, whether that's The gift of God's grace, or the gift of your family, or some gift that puts you in eternal debt? How can you pay it forward to someone else? And then lastly, I get to the debt of mercy. And mercy I define simply as letting someone know that you forgive them. Because this is where the rubber hits the road in Jesus' story. This servant who owed 10,000 talents, he is miraculously, wonderfully forgiven. He leaves the king's presence with a new lease on life. Like he can hardly believe his luck. And then he runs into another servant who owes him a debt of 100 denarii. Now, 100 denarii is not a small debt. A denarius was equal to a day's wage, for a whole day's labor. So to be owed 100 denarii, that's equal to 3 months worth of wages. It's not a small debt. It's only small in comparison to the outlandish debt that he'd already been forgiven. And what does this servant do? Does he say, hey, I've been blessed today. I can't believe my good luck. I'm going to forgive you too. No, he doesn't. Instead, he holds the servant that owes him 100 denarii to that debt, and when he can't pay, has him thrown in prison. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I find I struggle sometimes to let go of debt. I can't help it. There's some part of my brain that's like a mental, like a balance keeper. Like I keep the books in my head, and I remember certain debts over the years, right? I'll give you an example. When Jamel and I got married, this is 25 years ago in seminary, we had 2 friends who were also in seminary with us who got married just a few months before us. Jamelin's already rolling her head, shaking her head back there. She knows the story I'm going to tell. They got married just a little bit before us, right? And I can't say we were like super close friends, but we were close enough, like we ran in the same circle of friends. We were close enough that we got invited both to the bridal shower and to the wedding itself. And so that was 2 gifts that we gave, right? And I don't know what gifts we gave. Jamelin took care of it. She got them off their registry and gave them 2 gifts. A few months later, when we got married, guess what? They weren't able to come to the wedding. We got married here in Indiana, but they sent a gift. Wonderful. We opened the gift. It was a set of knives, like butcher block knives that you put on your counter. Problem was they weren't from our registry, and we already received from our registry a much better set of knives. And so this set of knives, we just thought we'll return it somewhere. And we probably went to 4 or 5 different department stores, and everyone scanned the code on the back and like, sorry, this didn't come from here. After 4 or 5 tries, we realized they regifted us a set of knives that I'm sure wasn't on their registry either. Someone had given them the knives, and they didn't want the knives. They didn't need the knives. We gave them 2 gifts. You with me? And they gave us an errand to take to Goodwill. That's what they gave us. And that was 25 years ago. And guess what? I still hold on to the debt. When I see them, that's the first thing that enters my mind is, hey, how's it going? How's your family? Yeah, those knives, I can't help it. And that's trivial, right? That's just so trivial. I don't spend my days worrying about these knives. But there are cuts that are deeper, right? There are pains and grievances, hurts that we all hold on to, and they are hard to let go. If I were to ask you the question, simple question, what debt do you have a hard time letting go? It doesn't take long to think of a handful of things that like, oh yeah, I can't seem to let that one go. Forgiveness isn't easy. And I want to be clear, when I say forgiveness, I'm not talking about reconciliation. Sometimes the friendship, the relationship will never go back to what it was before, but you can still forgive. What I mean by forgiveness is simply letting go of the debt. No longer holding someone else in debt to you, insisting that they pay you something that you feel you owe, or else if they can't pay it, they deserve to be punished. When we forgive the debt, we release them to go their own way. And we hope, sincerely hope, that good things will find them and come to them in life. And the amazing thing is that when we release someone else from that debt, we discover somehow our own heart gets free. Lewis Mead's wonderful pastor, he says, to forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover that the prisoner was you. When we cannot forgive, when we keep holding on to the debt, what ends up happening is we end up putting our own heart in a straitjacket. Like we constrict our own ability to love, to give, to move forward. We think we're holding them, punishing them, and because of the debt they owe, but they've moved on. We're the ones who are stuck in prison. So when we release the debts that we have been received, and to some degree it's only possible when we remember the great debt that God has released us from, when we, in light of his forgiveness, are able to forgive others, we not only set someone else free, we set our own heart free as well. And so my third question for reflection is this, is how can you show mercy by forgiving a debt that you've been holding on to? I started off talking about household debt, and there are these people, they kind of talk about good debt and bad debt, right? I'm not sure if any debt is necessarily good, but there is debt that seems inevitable in life, right? Like we have to take on some debt to send our kids to school, to buy homes, to have cars for transportation. It happens. It's the bad debt, the debt that crushes us, that we can never get out from under. That's what we want to avoid. And I would say I think the same thing is true spiritually. There's bad debt. Bad debt. There's hurt, grievance, bitterness, anger, hatred. Those debts that we hold on to, they are crushing, corrosive to our souls. And I want you to hear the good news that Jesus died to set you free from the debt of sin. Jesus died. He paid the price. You are free and clear. That's the good news. But I also want you to remember that his sacrifice puts us in his debt. We owe a good debt of gratitude and honor and mercy. And if we let it, those debts can shape our hearts so that we can become better vessels of his grace. We owe God our honor and our gratitude. And we pay that debt forward through mercy and compassion so that all can know God's love and grace. Amen.